here at Moss London this morning. If you've been to the store recently, you may have seen the car on display in there, a very, very lovely MGB V8, restored to a lovely standard. Today we've got Neil joining us, the owner of the car, and he's going to run us through the history of that particular car and what work has been done to it.
Since in the sort of 50 plus years I've been driving, I've had over 100 cars. The first one I bought was as soon as I was coming up to 17, I got a 1954 Hillman Minx, again in green, paid £65 for it, and I quickly changed that for an Austin Metropolitan, the British version of the Nash Metropolitan, very unusual car. Best car I've ever had, I think, was probably a Mark III M5, BMW M5, 1979. I had that car for 7 years and did 160,000 miles or thereabouts in it. Lovely car. Most exciting car, Ferrari 458, I've enjoyed very much. So yep, cars have played a major part, and in the middle of all that lot I had an MGB GT V8 that we bought for my wife, 1975 I think it was. It was an M registered car, 2 years old, by a local doctor, and it turned out to be a real winner. She loved it, and she always looks back on it as being one of her favourite cars. So this chap here is very linked to that initial experience. This car has a particularly special history. It's been owned by a World War II veteran, decorated veteran called Rawdon. He bought it, he ordered it in 1974 as a car to drive for his retirement. And he came to, he rang me because of my background with Moss, and he said, look, I want to retire. It's my wife's uncle, Uncle Ken, as we know him. I want to retire and I want a special car to drive for my retirement. Which model do you recommend I have? I want an MG. He wanted British, he wanted it British made. And I said, well, there's only one Ken you can have. Based on our experience, we've had, I think I've had over the years 5 MGBs and one V8 GT, and it was just head and shoulders above the rest. So you've got to go for a V8. A little more expensive to buy, but they don't make many of them. It'll be a rarer car. A little heavier on fuel, but it'll go a lot quicker than the standard 1800s. And he went out and ordered it. It was delivered in January 75, and he has driven that car right up until he died. He died in 2012, aged 94, so he was still driving right up to the end. This car was MOT'd and running right up to the day he died. He estimated in 2000 that he'd driven 157,000 miles in it. So if you think he did 160,000 up to 2000 and he carried on driving to 2012, it's a reasonable expectation that he did close to a 250,000 miles in that car. And as he said himself, it was incredibly reliable. The engine ran without any work on it at all. He said he replaced a few plugs and tyres, which is a slight understatement because I've seen all his bills, but they were for minor stuff, services and air filters and oil filters and just bulbs and bits and pieces. Hundreds of invoices, but none of any real substantial volume. So the car actually has been, quite an excellent addition to his life. And sadly, when he died, he said that he left it to his daughter, as you would. He had only one daughter, and he said, I don't want this car leaving the family, so you have to either sell it to a member of the family, and I'd like one of the grandchildren to have it if they're interested, because they were now adults, or I want it scrapped. I don't want it used by another family. Well, because of my wife's connections, I was regarded as family, so in the end I agreed to buy it, and I paid £2,500, a modest sum for such a car with such a history, because one owner, 250,000 miles of history, seen all over the world. It's a pretty unusual car, and the deal was that I would keep it for 5 years as it is. It would probably come into Moss. My connections here, although I'm not involved in Moss now, I still come in as often as I can and keep up with all the stuff. We'd bring it into the showroom. It would sit here and maybe sit in my own garage under storage until the 5 years was up. And my plan was to then refurbish it. And that's exactly what happened. it left Moss actually, it went up to British Motor Heritage. I'm a property man now, and Peter Buckles and I own the premises that British Motor Heritage occupy in Witney, all linked with the original acquisition from MG Rover. And I asked if they would be able to keep the car. And they said they certainly would. They'd be proud to have it on the premises, and it sat up there under covers. And then about sometime early 16, John Yeh, Managing Director of British Motor Heritage, said, well, this would be a great project for us to use as a rebuild. So Heritage have got a lot of experience making panel work, and they have to obviously check that that panel work is fit for purpose. So they do refits and occasionally a rebuild as a project, using the graduates as the trainee learning on the job. And so this car was scheduled to do just that. A young undergraduate called Vladimira Adelinu was asked if he would like to do it, and he signed up to it. He was doing an auto-mechanical degree at Oxford Brookes. And at the time, we thought the car was fairly original, and that it would be able to retain the existing original body shell. But when it went away to, it was stripped of all the parts, so Vladimira took everything off it and kept all the good items, sent some away for refurbishing. And I need to say in all this that the mastermind of this rebuild was Dave Jane, who's the operations manager at British Motor Heritage, and he's a true car enthusiast and very knowledgeable. He was the mastermind behind it. John Yeh gave the go-ahead. It was Dave Jane who did all the original estimating of what was required, planning out the schedule, and then giving Vladimira the instructions on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, Dave has helped in finishing the car off at the end, getting it ready for everyday driving. And they decided that, in fact, and after discussion, that the most economical and probably the best long-term option was to put a new body shell on it. So a new MG shell to V8 specification was commissioned by Heritage, and when that was ready, it went away to McCudden's body shop to do the respray, and you can see how it's beautiful. A beautiful finish all round. I mean, you go into the detail inside the engine compartment and so on. It's as a new car would, in fact, better than a new car would be. The engine was sent away to a company called Pit Stop, and quite an extensive rebuild was undertaken. We wanted to keep it original wherever we could. We did have a few extra bits. I mean, Newton Commercial provided the interior, and I didn't want those collapsed deck chair seats repaired. We've put a new seats in, which frankly I think most renovations these days put better seats in for driving comfort and safety. With an engine, a more powerful engine, and today's road conditions, we fitted an aluminium radiator, which I'm advised gives 40% better cooling, and I know that overheating in standing traffic can be an issue. And that was finished rebuild was finished in August last year, August 17. And I picked the car up, Dave Jane drove it for a couple of weeks approving it, and already we had a few problems. And I would say to anybody doing a rebuild, focus on getting OE parts and look at the quality of the parts before you fit them. The guys here know, the chaps on retail, they know when a part is in good quality or is not. So go to the right supplier and ask for quality and ask for the OE part, because I think that makes a difference. Yeah, I'm sure people will say, how much did it cost? It cost a lot more than I would have liked. The body shell was a big chunk, but I would say the retail price of the parts is in excess of 40,000, and probably quite well in excess of 40,000, and then you've got all the labour. That 40,000 does include the respray and the engine rebuild, so it's the parts that you couldn't do yourself. But if you did your own rebuild, I think you could probably get away with 40 grand to get a car of this quality. And this car is very special to us in the family. My wife is going to borrow it and drive it. My partner, I'm going to take it down to Somerset, she will drive it. First classic car she's driven since her husband had an MGB when she first met him. So there's a bit of nostalgia going on here. And the family of old Ken Rawdon, and I say, well done, Ken. He'll be just, if he could see it now, he'd be cock-a-hoop. And his daughter Hilary and his son and her son, his grandson Nathan, are going to come up and see it here at Moss, and they might well visit Heritage at some point to see what goes on there. So it's a fitting end to a very happy story, I think. I've had a lot of support along the way, as you'd expect. I must say thank you to John Yeh for the idea and giving permission for Heritage to do it, to Dave Jane, who put the whole project together and has masterminded it and run it. He's put a lot of hours in, including doing some of the remedial work himself. And I have to say thank you to Moss. Russell Scott acted as the coordinator for all the parts, and we've had a very large number of parts from Moss, including a few warranties, which Moss have dealt with without argument, without quibble. They've been changed. And also to Chris Salterich in the retail side here, who is an absolute nutter on rebuilds and very knowledgeable, and he's been picking up the points so that it's not quite done to spec. The badge is in the slightly wrong place, for example, and it's going to be changed, and a V8 badge will go on there when one can be sourced, and that's one of the things we've not been able to find as yet, and Chris is on the case. And that's a benefit, I guess, of working with people in the retail team who are themselves very knowledgeable, because they'll tell you what you need to do and what you've got right and what you've got wrong. So very valuable. And the last man we should say thank you to, I guess, is Vladimira himself, Vladimira Eleniu from Poland. I'm hoping he's putting his new learned skills here to good use, working in the motor industry and using his knowledge of telling people how great MGs are.